Thank you very much, everybody, for coming along to Yoga in a Post-Traumatic World. We've got an amazing lineup of people that when each of them said yes in turn, it was like, they're saying yes! So this is the inaugural United Nations World Day of Yoga. So it's the first time for me, it's the first time for all of us. And it is a little bit traumatic. So you should have seen me at 5 o'clock this morning. I was well and truly post-traumatic, but I've chilled out now. Okay, so we're going to open up some fairly pithy kind of conversations around the concept of trauma and how that relates to our own lives and those who have perhaps suffered even more deeply than we ourselves have. And I say that because, well, suffering might be the nature of things according to some yoga understandings. The people on the panel have amazing stories to tell of the people that they've worked with, and I'm sure they have their own amazing stories to tell. And we'll be inviting a few questions from the audience at the end of the discussion as well. So let's get started very gently by just opening up the whole concept of what we're here for. So yoga in a post-traumatic world. It's very hard to avoid trauma. Perhaps trauma starts before birth, depending on how you think about these things. It's very hard to avoid vicarious trauma because we read about it, we see it, it's there all the time. And, you know, a lot of us make the choice in the yoga world to, for a moment in our lives, to not look at newspapers, not look at magazines, not look at televisions for just this reason that we feel that by putting that out there that we're able to then get on with our own lives and develop in the way that we need to in our body, in our minds and in our spirits. So this panel is very much about asking the question about how yoga can be used to not avoid trauma but to deal with trauma, and why. Because perhaps one way of thinking about yoga is that it prepares us all to be of service. And to truly be of service, we need to know how to really work with that trauma as it moves through our body and to not let it leave the imprint that can bring us low and make us no longer be useful in the world and no longer useful to ourselves. So I'm just going to slowly introduce this panel of wonderful people here. Fernando Chinese, who is a wonderful yogi. He teaches a lot of yoga at Bendy Awareness is his business name. Very cute, really. But he also teaches yoga out at a correctional centre. And so working with the population that he works with has its challenges and its rewards, and he's going to be talking to us a little bit about that. And I would just love you to say a few words about what you do in that context, and then we'll move on to the next person.
Hi. What I do there, sorry.
Like a rock star, yeah?
Should I sing? No, not for anyone. No. So I go to this correctional center where there is this program for addicts, people who were addicts to drugs and they committed some crimes to get more drugs. So they were caught and they were in jail, and then they are moved, if they behave nicely, they are moved into this special program where the idea is to help them to become useful in society again, to be able to manage their own problems and be reintegrated in society. They have a lot of classes there, tapes, and one of the psychologists there introduced me into them as a volunteer. Yoga is not something that public opinion is very favorably towards being taught in jails. So there is no budget for that. So I go there every week. It's 2 hours from home, 1 hour and a half. And I teach there, and then I come back. And I do it just for the satisfaction of being with these guys, when they finish, they are the most grateful of all the students I have. Even those classes where I go and I get paid, and even those private classes, I feel the gratification that it brings to me. So I hope that I'm making a difference in their lives as well.
And just to talk a little bit about that story, where Fernando teaches, we were very keen to hear the story of his teaching. So we took a film crew out there and we interviewed Fernando outside the gate. And we got kind of followed off the property, and then we got phoned up by Fernando saying, uh-oh, because you were saying that perhaps that people aren't really excited about yoga being taught in these places, so there's no budget. The problem was that 2 years ago it had hit the news that there was yoga being taught in some jail, and they'd had to form a policy, a national policy, to no longer teach yoga in jails because of the general populace's thinking that this was like a resort for prisoners. How dare they be allowed to practice yoga? Anybody here done yoga before? It's not lying there and taking it easy, is it? It's dealing with your stuff. So, yeah. Now, Dominica teaches at Starts, and she's just started a program at Starts working with refugees who've experienced trauma and torture. And again, I'm not sure how that's going, so I'm going to hand it over to her.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. My name's Dominica. I'm a clinical psychologist and a yoga teacher. And just like Kate said, I work at Starts, which is the New South Wales treatment service for treatment and rehabilitation of torture and trauma survivors. So I work at Starts as a therapist. So my main role is to conduct one-on-one counselling sessions with asylum seeker and refugee clients. And just recently, in the last sort of 5 to 6 weeks, we've started a group yoga program with Tibetan refugees in DY. So there's a really large cohort of Tibetans living in DY. And we're up to about week 4 of the content of the yoga program, and yeah, it's going really, really well. So we're doing a sort of 40 to 50 minute discussion and sort of information provision around the impacts of trauma on the body and the brain, and speaking through a lot of that stuff, and then doing another sort of 45-minute physical asana practice that complements what we've discussed. And the feedback's really good so far, and everyone seems to be enjoying it. And yeah, I guess it provides, our service with a way to provide a service when resources are limited, and we can provide that to a larger group of people than what one-on-one counselling can do. So yeah, I feel really lucky to be here and to be able to do that with my work, and yeah.
How easy was it for you to get the program started, to get it through the people who had to make decisions? Was it a no-brainer that they would accept teaching yoga?
Yeah, it was. We're very lucky at Starts. We work with a biopsychosocial model of care, so we're really open to treating all those different elements, and we have particular staff who work with the body and the arousal system, and massage therapists, orthobionomists, acupuncturists, nutritionists, and so yoga was just, I guess, a really natural progression of those kinds of things. The hardest part was probably me finding the time to develop the program and still see my individual clients and sort of uphold that part of my role. But yeah, we're hoping just by starting slow, we'll get some really good outcomes and hopefully have a bit more of reason to make it broader and have it more than just one group going at a time and things like that.
And the last thing was, I'm really interested that you're working with Tibetan refugees as a specific group. So are you separating it by nationality, or what are you going to do in the future?
So for the project that we're working on at the moment, it's sort of like a 10-week closed group project, just to try and get some data on how it's working. And that's just logistically easiest to do with a single language group. So we're actually using an interpreter. So we're doing a yoga class with an interpreter, which is a bit interesting. And yeah, if we were to do that with 2 or 3 languages in the room, it'd probably be a bit of a challenge. So yeah, at the moment, just single language group is the focus, and the Tibetans were such a beautiful group to begin with. They have such a rich history of meditation, and some of them have practiced yoga in India whilst they've been waiting to come to Australia, and they're really sort of open to the ideas that we're discussing and those kinds of things. So it's been, really a really nice place to start.
So I should introduce you. Okay, third person in our panel is Rob Ginnivan, and Rob Ginnivan works, he's labelled there with his soldier on t-shirt, works in an increasing capacity, it sounds like, with people who've come back from war zones. So how long have you been doing that now? I'm not sure. Tell the story.
Thank you. Yeah, hi, welcome, and thanks for attending today. So I'm Rob Ginnivan, the National Mindfulness Coach, yoga teacher, and meditation teacher for Soldier On. Has anyone heard of Soldier On? Yeah, it's starting to really make an impact in the community at the moment, with the goal of reintegrating our wounded warriors or contemporary veterans, war veterans, back into the community. A number of them have gone away and they've done a number of tours of duty, and they've come back, a lot of them psychologically injured. There's between 3,000 to 7,000 of them that are out there, but a lot of them haven't put up their hand yet to come forward and get help. And what we're saying is, please come out and get help, because it's okay. I'm co-authoring a book with one of our wounded warriors, Todd Berry, he's our poster boy for Soldier On. He's now a public speaker, and with myself and another person called John Ogilvie from Byron Yoga Centre are sending Todd and Chris on a scholarship to do the yoga teacher training in Bali week after next. They're going to come back and start, we've empowered them to go and spread the word and help others. Post-traumatic stress, in my view, I'll talk about it a little bit later, is extended beyond the military. It's wounded warrior by name is not limited to people that have gone away and fought in the war. There are photographers, there are the supporters, the sappers, the engineers, people that support these people, and they too experience trauma and very graphic subject matter when they're away. Yoga is really helpful in getting them back on track, and I've been working with some people that have come from suicidal, and they've now are reintegrating back in the community, and we just need to spread the word and get it out there more. To that extent, I've now been asked by other organisations to work with them. So I've done a mindfulness teaching for the Royal Commission for Child Sexual Abuse, because that itself they suffer from post-traumatic stress, and it's starting to become even broader than that. So I really feel grateful to be of service as a mindfulness coach to our wounded warriors, but primarily in the military, and will continue to do so, and it's very fulfilling. And I'm working with a number of people, and there's a few here in the room, that we want to continue to spread the word and empower people to go and reach out and find those others that aren't willing to come out yet and get help.
So that whole thing of spreading the word and getting it out into community, like things don't work, do they, really, in our society? The poor, the weak and the maimed tend to be left to their own devices more than they should be. So the question is, how do we get this word out there about the fact that yoga is quite useful? Or is yoga quite useful? We'll explore that in a minute. So Shirley Hicks is a big expert on post-traumatic stress syndrome disorder, depending what you want to call it. And she's come all the way down from Queensland to be with us, which is really wonderful today. Psychologist and psychotherapist and yoga teacher, combining the two and really informing our community of yoga teachers in a great way about how to proceed. So.
Thanks, Kate. I'd like to thank Sarah Bull too. I think is an offsider here and one of the instigators for this panel. It's so great to be having a discussion about trauma in yoga. And I'd like to thank all the other panellists. It's really great to see other like-minded individuals and everyone working in different sectors of the market. As Kate said, I work as a psychotherapist. I'm a somatic psychotherapist and been working with clients for about 20 years, mainly in trauma recovery. They may present with eating disorder, drug and alcohol, gambling, chronic depression, anxiety, but underneath that is either some form of complex trauma as a result of child abuse or developmental trauma, or the more widely understood post-traumatic stress disorder. My basic role is to help people find their bodies again, because they're absolutely disembodied. And if we can help our clients find bodies, then they're actually able to better to navigate the world. And as a result of that, some colleagues of mine and I went across to the States a couple of years ago and did a yoga program with Bessel van der Kolk, who was one of the lead psychiatrists who actually coined the term PTSD way back in the 60s. And they've developed a yoga program with quite a lot of research behind it. They've just recently released a paper where they did a survey with women who were experiencing PTSD, highly dissociative, not able to manage affect or emotions at all. And after 10 weeks of trauma-aware yoga, actually 50% of those clients no longer demonstrated any PTSD symptoms. So it's quite an amazing work that's happening, and I'm also here today representing Trauma Sensitive Yoga Australia, where we run programs for both yoga teachers and mental health clinicians to make them very aware of how yoga and becoming aware of our bodies can actually be one of the areas that's been sadly missing in the treatment of trauma. Don't get me started on CBT, but I'm really happy to be here today and I look forward to a robust discussion.
I am going to get you started. Okay, so thanks so much. And Tira Tan, the last panellist, or another panellist here, has been working with her organisation that she founded. Which year did you found it?
2004.
Wow, some time ago. Art to Living, working with women and children who've been sexually trafficked throughout Southeast Asia, and has been having amazing effect within that community and has been tireless in what she does. So I'll let her talk.
Thank you, Kate. I got really excited when you started speaking, Shelley, because everything that you spoke about, I was like, yes, yes, yes. So I work with mainly women and children and young people who have been sold into the sex slavery industry in Asia and the Pacific. So we work in South Asia, in India, Nepal, and we work in Southeast Asia as well as Australia with the indigenous population in the Northern Territory. And from my experience working with child sexual abuse survivors and women and girls who have been sold at a very young age, the youngest I've worked with in Cambodia, she was sold when she was 18 months old. So when Shirley talks about developmental trauma, that's it, and when we talk about, healing, trauma recovery, being connected to the body is so important, because when something painful happens to you, to your body in sexual abuse, immediately you disassociate and you disconnect from the body because that experience is painful. And so, yoga and body-based therapies are so important to reconnect our minds back to our bodies, our presence back to our bodies in a healthy way, in a safe way, in a way that maybe gives us pleasure again, to reclaim that back, that healing back to ourselves. Because the body and the mind are two parts of the same coin. So, it is really imperative that we start this conversation with trauma, that, somatics have to be involved in this conversation. So I work as a expressive arts therapist and a yoga teacher. I'm very passionate about somatic experiencing, and that the intelligence of the body is a tool that we can use, and it's a great tool that we can find healing in. So I'm very passionate about spreading that message, and what I've seen from the women that I've worked with as well, and how they've reclaimed their sense of power and strength through their body, So I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you, Kate.
You've all got microphones next to you. I'll just stay with this one. So the whole thing about yoga, like what yoga actually means, of course, is to yoke our body and our mind and our spirit together, and that can get smashed, or it can get a little bit tightened, or it can be distorted, or that connection can be weakened in many different ways that we've heard about here. So I'm really interested to know how it looks to you guys when you see somebody come back into a state of being yoked, coming back into their bodies to be present. And I want to question whether you agree with the statement of, was it the Dalai Lama that said, we're not human doings, we're human beings. So how do we move back into a state of full presence and full being, it being the place where perhaps happiness is to be found? Would anybody like to talk to that? You just have to pull it out here.
Okay. So, before I talk, I'd really love to give everybody just a 3-minute taste of a mindfulness meditation session that I do with the Wounded Warriors. So would you like to be part of that? Yes. And it's just a matter of bringing the feet firmly planted to the ground. And it's either just looking down to the nose tip with a soft gaze or closing the eyes gently. And the hands are just comfortable in the lap. Now, at any time through the next few minutes, if there's a discomfort with the eyes closed, the escape hatch is to open the eyes and just take a gaze down to something concrete in front. So I'd invite you now just to connect with the breath and just be present to one inhale and one exhale at a time. Just acknowledge that in this present moment, everything is okay now. Just allowing your breath to be centre stage in a position that embodies dignity. Just feel the rising and the falling of the abdomen. It won't be uncommon for thoughts to come and go. I invite you as a thought comes up just to purely witness it in a non-judgmental way and focus on the next breath. I invite you to bring your attention to your hands. Just acknowledge the energy that exists. And your feet firmly planted to the earth. And as everything is okay now in this moment, be empowered, inspired, enhanced, and soldier on. You can just begin to deepen the breath and gently open the eyes when you're ready. So I just wanted to give you a taste of how we start off our sessions with our soldiers that have been out and associated family members as well. Back to Kate's question. So how do we deal with it? And it comes a lot with the body. And you mentioned Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He's written a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's so true. And certainly with the people I'm working with, they come in and it's more psychological injuries rather than physical injuries. Interestingly enough, I think in the United States there's more physical injuries there amongst the military. But the kind of languaging that I use is just to create freedom in the body, just by moving the body in certain ways, creating freedom down one side, freedom down in the legs, in the hips. And freedom is a word that I know the people I work with really want to hear, because they're not free, especially what goes on inside their minds. And then from the body, we start talking about the link between the mind and the body. And, there is a connection between both. And so we keep it non-sectarian. We don't use any bells or chimes or oming. We just map it to the science of how moving the body around can really help to deal with what's going on in the mind, and stilling the mind can help with what's going on with the body. And we're finding that that's how we get the introduction into these soldiers being receptive to yoga. And that's if anyone else would like to share, that's sort of mine. I don't want to steal the limelight.
So I'm interested that you come, in yoga we always come from 2 points, from the mind into the body and the body into the mind. And what you've been saying all is that the body has been the lacking component in what we do with people who've been through trauma. So what for you is your experience of what part of the yoga is the thing that makes the difference, that actually helps people come back into their body and into their mind?
Could I think to that? This might be heretical to say this, but it's not so much about what type of yoga, but the context and the intention within which the yoga is delivered. That is the most important part of the work. So where clients can have an opportunity to feel safe, to feel that they can have choice to do what it is that they wish to do with their bodies, to be able to take effective action. So if they're in discomfort, to move towards pain. And that seems a very simple, basic requirement, but people that are recovering from trauma have no capacity to remove themselves from the hell, the past that they live every moment in their present moment body. And so we're trying to bring them back into a present moment body. Doesn't matter whether you're doing Ashtanga, Iyengar, Hatha, Dhru, whatever it is, the yoga style is not what it is about. And I giggle a little bit when I see different styles doing research to say, well, our style's better than this style. And it's most probably more about the empathic resonance of the teacher to the client's needs, and for the client to discover their body. And when Kate asked, what do you witness? It's quite amazing. I've been working recently with a group with the Mental Illness Fellowship, which was the old Schizophrenia Fellowship. And in mental health, it's really missed, the trauma origins. And to see people's bodies awakening and moving again, and to have 6 people in a room doing their own form of cat and in their bodies and loving it is the work. And then the mind will catch up. I don't really that interested in the mind, because the mind is just trying to find a story to explain the body's experience. So I just help the body to have their experience, and the mind will catch up and will make a more supportive and empowering story. So that's sort of what I'm noticing with the work. Yeah.
It's a really fascinating perspective. It really is. And in my own personal practice, I know that, or in my own personal life too, that it's doing the physical work when I've been through a traumatic moment that releases me more than talking about the experience again and again and again. And that is a fairly contentious statement also.
Well, I think doing the physical stops the trauma. We all have traumatic events, but it's only trauma when the body gets locked in that past experience and doesn't realise that it's now in a new experience. So one of the things when people have been traumatised was they often never had choice. Like Tira's clients, they just had to be there, and so they had to leave to be present. And so if we can move when we're experiencing anxiety or stress in our life, then we sort of trauma-proof ourselves. But it's these people who haven't had the chance to do that, and we need to be able to provide them that chance consistently over a period of time, and that they can start to waken up again. Yeah.
Would you like to?
Yeah, I thought I'd just add a little bit to what Shirley was saying, and I think the most important part of yoga that I've found to be helpful for this client group is using the breath. Like, I think, similar to what Shirley was saying, it doesn't matter what type of movement, what type of yoga, or, what the intervention is, but the science is there that when we lengthen the exhale breath, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of our body that turns off the stress response. And so for the group of people that we work with, at the moment we're servicing, clients from places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Tibet, Burma, Iran, Sri Lanka. So a lot of countries that have been disrupted for a really long period of time. So people have not just lived through one single incident trauma, but their nervous system has been, running in a fight or flight response for their whole lives. And so they're affected in a way that none of us have been affected. So our resting nervous system is pretty restful for most of us. And when it is activated by some kind of threat, we can get it back to resting pretty quickly. Whereas a lot of the people that we work with, their resting state is already really activated and really agitated. And so a lot of the breath work really helps to bring that back into regulation and bring their resting state down and make the body more of a safer place to be able to function in and be a part of the world in. And I think it's interesting, in my master's degree, we learned a bit about using the breath in a CBT-focused course. And I was young and I was like, what is this business? It doesn't make any sense. I wasn't confident in delivering it. And it wasn't until I started practicing yoga and I just copied what my yoga teacher was doing in a class with my clients in one-to-one therapy that it really started to make sense. And I felt confident to do it. And then the people I was doing it with obviously realised that it was beneficial as well. So yeah, I think yoga has effects in many different ways.
So can it really be that simple? Does it just come down to lengthening the exhale and that's what works? I'm wondering what your experience is of teaching classes.
I was hearing, I agree in a lot of that has been said here. Does it work? And I don't know, with these guys that I work with, I don't like to call them clients. They're just students of yoga, as we all are. And the question for them is, how do they get there? How do they get into drugs and being addicts? And I don't dwell into that. I don't go into there, and I don't really care. To work with them, I just focus on the moment, on how they move. But the body is just the beginning for me. I don't stay there. I start by reconnecting with the body because that's what we feel. That's what we can connect with more easily. The mind is there somewhere. We are not even aware of that. But only after the end of the class, maybe they start to realize through the breathing, through the movements, synchronizing the breathing with the movement, is when they start to realize that they have thoughts, they are thinking, and then they come into the moment. So I don't really, it's like, it's not just the body, it's the whole thing. We only start with the body, but for me, the body is just the beginning. It's the easier path into ourselves. And that's what I try to do with them. Through the movements, but finishing up with a lot of what we are feeling and how we can express that. I don't know if I was clear or not.
So I know when I lived in India, I used to go to the Himalayas with the monks, and the monks would do their yoga practice, on the boulders, the Himalayas. It was very romantic. But, their practice wasn't about getting into poses. Their practice was actually about elongating the breath as much as possible. So I would be in awe looking at these monks, and they could breathe just one sun salutation, just that would take 3 minutes, because they knew that, the state of mind was connected to their breath. So this is one of the core practices in the yoga that I teach in the shelters with these women. In addition to regulating the nervous system and it's about also bringing presence to our body and the way we breathe. And our breath is the gift of life itself. And the tool of the breath brings us into the moment, because each breath is different. just as each downward dog is different. So it brings us to the moment. There was a couple of things that I wanted to say. So with a lot of the women that I work with, the women and children, so there is the fight response, there is the flight response, but there's also a freeze response. And this is what I see in a lot of the women and children that I work with. Because when you've been, violated in that way, you freeze. Because there's no way really for you to go. You're locked in a room for many, many hours a day. Really, you're stuck. So the process that I see these women, children go through is what I feel that sense of thawing out, or they are learning how to be safe and to find their autonomy, to find their choice, and to reconnect safely back to the body again. And the way I kind of teach yoga is all about self-love. It's all about bringing compassion and presence and love back to the self. And, in our culture today, it is very busy. So we have busy minds, we do a lot of things, we're busy, busy, busy. In the culture that I work with these women and children, they are, I think, maybe like 150 times more busy than us, because in their culture, they have to serve their parents-in-law, they have children, they work from 8 to 6 o'clock. And I don't actually know how they find the time to do all these things. So they're giving a lot. And I work for a few organizations where it's amazing stories, but the women that have been trafficked themselves, they get to a certain point of recovery and they've set up organizations where they help other sex trafficked survivors. And when I teach yoga, when I teach the practices, they are so diligent, they're so grateful, they take it home, and I say, it would be great if you could wake up every day, half an hour before you start your day, which is at 4:30. They wake up to do the laundry and clean the house and cook for the whole family and all that. And I say, just do your practice, just do your practice of self-love. So I give them a little sequence that they can take home. And, they wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and they do their practice, and they breathe love into the places where it hurts the most. And they imagine compassion, going to their cells and to the parts of their bodies, but also their minds and their hearts that are wounded. So they give compassion back to themselves. And the feedback that I hear is that is so incredible for them. The feedback that I get is, I didn't even realize I had a body. I didn't even realize I had a body that I could feel. I didn't know what it was like to do that because I was numb. And yoga has been an amazing, I think, way of, I don't know if there's a word, denumbing, but of returning, of awakening slowly and lovingly, bring safety back to life. Mm-hmm.
I'm just watching the process of this panel and watching as Atira's speaking or Rob's speaking or any of you are speaking and everybody else on the panel going. So it's really amazing to me how we learn from each other. We've all got these very separate client groups with separate nationalities, separate experiences, but all similar result, which is the constriction, the freezing, the flight, the fight or flight response. It's true for all of us, isn't it? And I'm wondering that, these are fairly deep levels of trauma, being somebody who's trafficking drugs, ending up in jail, that's pretty damn horrible to go through. These are fairly extreme levels of trauma, and I don't know everybody in this room, perhaps you too have been through similar levels of trauma, but even if we haven't been through this sort of level of trauma, is it possible that we can take the lessons that we are learning here from each other and apply them to ourselves? Because I think, and I don't know, I wonder how you think. Do you think that I don't see that many people that are living 100% of their lives? I think that most of us are frozen, most of us are in flight and most of us are in fight mode to some extent. So, and that means that there's very limited capacity for us to deal. Yeah, I'm just wondering.
I just want to say something. The people we deal with, they are the heavyweight, let's say, of trauma. But we all carry a trauma. We all have our own moments, and if we just don't open the eyes and try to live in the moment, we think that we are going down a hole and not recovering from there. Each one has different levels, and you can compare to one to another. Each one lives a different life, and what you learned in the past is how you observe, how you react to the moment, how you live that moment. So it's hard for me to compare the guys who have been with drugs with someone who was raped or someone who was witnessing his best friend die beside himself. So I don't know. It's very hard to compare one to another. So I prefer not to. But it's good to recognize that each one of us has that wound inside, and we have to deal with it. Leave it behind. Just live the moment. Start with the body, if that's what you know, and move on from there.
Yes, and something I'm picking up in the conversations that we've been having is some universal commonality, and that's breath and body. It all comes back to the breath, all comes back to the body. Regardless of what kind of trauma you've experienced, regardless the level of trauma that you've experienced. And as long as we lead by example with ourselves and have a practice of using the breath and the body to connect the mind and the body and create some more harmony in ourselves, that starts there. And then if we can then go out to the community and impart that knowledge, wisdom and passion and compassion to other people, and then encourage them to do the same, that's where the ripple effect of yoga is going to reach the world.
I love that. Okay, so that activation, isn't it? Really reactivating and activating each other as we move on. I'm wanting to take, we've got a very short time for this panel and it's terribly sad, but just to move that conversation to, is it possible, do you think, panel, that we can get to a point where we're able to teach each other how to deal with trauma as it's happening or before it happens? And I want to ask that because we're continually being exposed to trauma in our own lives, and in this fairly rich white culture of ours, we send a lot of our kids and a lot of us into the front line of difficult situations around the world and difficult situations at home. We send them out there as social workers, we send them out there as volunteers. You know, how must it be for an 18-year-old to say, I'm going to go and help in Nepal, and to witness people dying of chest infection because they can't keep warm and watching their kids die. And, you know, we come back with that trauma to this culture if we're exposed to that, if we don't know how to deal with it. I'm wondering, it's a big, long conversation, and I hope to continue this conversation next year, but I'm wondering, are there some tools in our kit as yoga teacher that we can work with people to establish a sense of peace and a sense of well-being and a sense of being able to deal that will prevent the trauma occurring to us or being held by our body?
If I could go first. I think possibly the one things we can give our clients and ourselves is awareness. If we have awareness in any moment of what our experience is, number one, and number two, then an awareness of being able to process and work with that rather than have to park it somewhere, then it sort of trauma-proofs it. And I just want to make the distinction because I'm hearing people sort of using the word trauma interchangeably with PTSD, and they're two very different things, and I don't want people to think that we're all got PTSD. You know, it's a very different distinction to being in a traumatic situation and feel the stress of that. And as Dominica was saying, then, but to be able to regulate again. these are skills we need. And I think that actually has to start at the school level, teaching children how to breathe, how to be in their bodies, how to be able to express their feelings in a healthy way. So this is generational. This isn't just a 3-year program. But then I think as yoga teachers, we have a great capacity to demonstrate, model and support our clients to have an awareness of their bodies, not to make their body look like mine in a yoga class, but to find out how their body can look doing whatever we're doing. And I think that really does sort of trauma-proof us a little bit. And I know we don't have time, but it also has a huge neurochemical and neurobiological effect that also supports the client to not necessarily carry that as a PTSD. But we don't have, that might be another panel another day.
Goodness, there's years and years. So this is a conversation that we're all having. I mean, we're all exploring this, and I would very much like to, because we've got dignitaries arriving here in 20 minutes on this platform. So I would really love to just spend the next 4 minutes seeing if anybody's got any burning questions that they'd like to ask the panel. Oh.
It's quite common. And so certainly I work in fairly mainstream programs. There's no Sanskrit. There's no, going to the light, listening to your whatever. It's incredibly grounded body kosher work is where we stay. Yeah.
I think when you map it back to the science, that's pretty much generally accepted by everybody. And then from there, if anyone wants to choose to take on a different path, then that's their choice to go forward there. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends on different cultures. Like I work in a lot of Asia, and in that culture they're very open to yoga. So the mention of yoga, everyone's like, oh yes, yoga, I love yoga. But the programs that run here in Australia with young people. So we have to language things a little bit differently. So we're going to breathe and stretch and get into our bodies. So to language it in a way that feels comfortable for them. Because again, it comes back to safety. So we want, our students to feel safe. We want them to feel welcome. We want them to feel okay with what they're doing. So I think that's the most important thing.
Just can I add to that? Even the word yoga, I know with the military guys, I'll replace the word yoga with warrior body movement and mind stillness. Oh, yeah, we can do that. Yep.
I have
let's just make it accessible to the way they'd like to receive it.
With the guys it's a male prison where I'm teaching, and it's very hard to get them to do yoga. It's a women thing, they think. Until they do it and they realize that they can't do it. But coming to the religion thing, I think it depends on the person. Some persons that are fanatics, they are not going to go anywhere. They are enclosed in their fanaticism and they don't want to see anything else but that. Just have to leave them alone. You can't preach everyone. You can't preach anyone, actually. It's just a matter of choice to each one.
Just on that, I think we have to be mindful, with yoga classes, who's in your room. I see so many, unfortunately, people come to me, survivors of cult abuse and things. They've been to a yoga class and absolutely terrified and never go back to yoga class. And that's not the intention of the teacher in any way. But we don't know who is in our room. And so I think it informs us all to be much more trauma aware when we're working with our clients. If you're not aware of that, there's plenty of material around now. We run programs. There's no reason why anyone should be ignorant around running yoga classes. And I don't want to be part of a community that continues to re-traumatize those people that are already dealing. So we all, if that's my take home, get educated about working with clients with trauma. Because having a warm, open heart is not enough. You need to have an understanding of what you're doing.
Thank you. I think that's so important, and I think that's a message that I keep hearing again and again from our yoga community, teaching each other, because we all know now people who've walked away from yoga classes re-traumatised, not only physically but mentally. It's especially hard when we're teaching meditation and everybody's got their eyes closed and you really can't tell what's going on in there, so it's important. There is so much more to talk about, and I'm hoping that these people who you see before you are going to be hanging around, available to chat for a good while longer. So if you have pressing questions, I wonder if you would find them and discuss it with them. And I'm going to give you all a little bit of takeaway homework to prepare for next year when we bring this conversation back, which is just to really have a moment thinking about how trauma affects you, and have you experienced trauma? When you use that word in your own life, can you kind of discern where that lands in your own body? Because it's only by feeling it in our own bodies, dealing with it, as Rob says, and then showing by example that we can activate others, so that eventually we're all living at 100% and available to deal with what Narendra Modi says beautifully, all the things that yoga gives us, prepares us to deal really well with climate change. So let's all get 100% available to be useful out there by dealing with our own trauma and thinking how that looks. Thanks so much for coming.
I'll just say one more thing in addition to support Kate, and that is 69 years ago, after World War II, the United Nations was formed. And we have representation from the United Nations here today, and I just want to acknowledge the representation, because they formed United Nations so that we wouldn't have another world war. And so far we haven't. And I think that by moving yoga along with United Nations support into the community, we can keep preventing some of these darkness and nasty situations.
So let's us, as the yoga community, bring this conversation down to a body level and be really effective in continuing the initial work, the last 69 years of the United Nations, in bringing about a peaceful world. Good. Thank you.
I guess also, just as a psychologist, I don't want to forget the mind, and part of yoga is managing the fluctuations of the mind. And I think today we've spoken really nicely and summarised about the body and how the body helps us recover from these things, but it also allows our thinking brain to switch back on again. So when we down-regulate our stress system, our frontal cortex, our thinking brain, our decision-making brain, our problem-solving brain comes back online, and that's the kind of thing that we need working all the time, to function as a human, and also to better the world. So don't forget your minds, take really good care of them, do your yoga and get some therapy too if you need. Yeah.
Thank you very much, panellists.